Hi again, everyone. Gary Digital Williams here on the Boxing on Beltway Podcast Network. And the Boxing on Beltway Podcast Network brought to you as always on Spreaker.com, iHeartRadio, also on TuneIn. We're on Spotify. We're on Podcast Addict. We're on Stitcher and on Google Podcasts. So any way you can go, you can listen to the Boxing on Beltway Podcast Network. We're also on YouTube, my YouTube page, Gary Digital Williams. We're also on Facebook, on the Boxing on Beltway Podcast Network page, and we're also in many different places around the world. You can definitely, and also my Twitter page as well on Digital25. Got a light schedule this week as far as bouts are concerned. A couple bouts one bout has been canceled, and another two bouts are coming up this weekend. So we're going to talk about that. We're also going to talk about really what's the sad side of Beltway boxing. There were a number of deaths that took place over this Beltway boxing journey. And we've had a number of them over the years, but three in particular really touched me and continues to stay with me even after they passed away. And then I'm going to put on my wrestling cap real quickly and talk about the recent passing of a Southern wrestling legend. This guy was a tremendous wrestler throughout the South, and he passed away this week. And we're going to talk about him as well. The Boxing on Beltway Podcast Network is brought to you always by Real-Time Pain Relief. From boxers to ballerinas, for shoulder pain to muscle strain, everything between. Boxing on the Beltway recommends Real-Time Pain Relief, the natural, plant-based, safe, fast, effective ointment. Go to freepainoffer.com, buy $10 worth of Real-Time Pain Relief. You get a free $10 tube of Real-Time Pain Relief, now endorsed by former two-time heavyweight champion Big George Foreman, so you can try his knockout formula at Real-Time Pain Relief. Rub it on, the pain is gone in real time. And by DeborahSpears.com. She has great weight loss tips, great jewelry, and great training methods, all at Deborah, Debra Spears.com. Well, one of the bouts that was scheduled for this week, but it apparently would not take place, was scheduled to take place in California, Los Angeles, California, at the Microsoft Theater, featuring Lamont Rose Jr. Well, apparently that whole card has been canceled, so that bout will not take place. It was scheduled to be on the Zone, but apparently the bout will not take place. Now, coming up on Friday, August 28th, which is tonight as we record this, undefeated Baltimore, Maryland-born heavyweight Cassie Cheney, he'll take on a veteran by the name of the Hilliard Hammer, Chauncey Welliver of Spokane, Washington. That'll be an 8-round contest coming up Friday at the Osceola Heritage Park in Kissimmee, Florida. Now, the bout is scheduled to be televised on Telemundo, but according to what I've seen, and maybe different elsewhere around the country, but Telemundo is not scheduled to televise this bout until midnight, if it's on the schedule at all. I think it's the co-feature, so we'll see if it's going to be on television. But Cassie Cheney, who's 18-0, 12 KOs, he competes for the first time in 2020. He scored a third-round knockout in his last outing over Nick Jones. That was on November 27th in Windham, New Hampshire. Now, Chaney himself apparently lives in New London, Connecticut, but he still has a lot of ties to Baltimore. I think Calvin Ford and Kenny Ellis still work with him. So we'll see what happens there. Now, Welliver is 57-12-5 with 23 KOs. He did win his last two bouts, but he has not fought since October of 2018. That's when he won a 10-round unanimous decision over previously undefeated Eric Hempstead. Eric Hempstead was 7-0 at the time, and Welliver beat him. Now, they had to weigh in yesterday as we record this. And Chaney is going to have a huge weight disadvantage in this situation. Chaney came in at around 263.2 pounds, which is kind of heavy for a heavyweight. But it's nowhere near where Welliver came in. Welliver came in, he took the scales. He tipped the Toledos, as my friend, the auctioneer Brad Dudley says, at a whopping 378 pounds. That may be a record for any boxer I've ever seen come into the ring that I've personally ever seen. I don't think I've ever seen anybody come into the ring that heavy. 378 pounds. That's almost 400 pounds, folks. And I know heavyweight's open division and there's no weight limit, of course, but whew, that's something. 378 pounds. So Chaney may have his work cut out for him in this situation. So that'll be Friday as we record this tonight. Cassie Cheney taking on Chauncey Welliver. That'll be at the Osceola Heritage Park in Kissimmee, Florida. And the bout is scheduled to be on Telemundo, but again, in my neck of the woods, the Telemundo boxing card begins at midnight. So I don't know if it's actually going to begin at midnight or it's just tape delay. I'm not sure what's going to happen. So we'll see. We'll see what happens there. Now, on Saturday, August 29th in New Hampshire, speaking of New Hampshire, the Sports Zone in Deary, New Hampshire, Larry Hitman Pryor out of Frederick, Maryland, the cruiserweight, he's scheduled to be in a 4-round bout against Francisco Aridi Neto. Aridi Neto out of Woburn, Massachusetts, by way of Brazil, Sao Paulo, Brazil. Now, Larry Pryor, as we know, 11-22 with 5 KOs, coming off 2 straight losses. One of them was to F. Tabor Apochi. That was his last bout on October 4th in Houston, Texas. He lost by 4-round TKO. Neto is 1-8 with 1 KO, and he's lost just about every bout except for his pro debut by knockout. His only win came in March of 2019. He scored a 3rd-round TKO over Joe Gagliotti Jr. His last bout was a first-round knockout loss. In fact, his last 5 bouts have all ended in first-round knockouts. His last one against James Perkins. That was at the Sports Zone in Deary, New Hampshire on October 26th. So we'll see what happens here. Larry Pryor in a 4-round bout against Francisco Aridi Neto. That'll be Saturday, August 29th at the Sports Zone in Deary, New Hampshire. Now, as I said, over the years, we've had a number of boxers sadly pass away for different reasons. Some were in bad situations. Some just of age, I should say. Baltimore, we've had boxers killed in automobile accidents and truck accidents. But we had 3 boxers over my career that really, for me, were the most tragic, and three that hit me the hardest and still stay with me to this very day. The first one was one I've talked about before, but it's the passing of Reuben Rapman Bell. Now, out of 3 boxers we're going to talk about, Reuben Bell, Jerry Technician Ballard, and Behaven Bumblebee Scotland, Bell might have been the most talented and probably had the most potential to be a world champion. Reuben Bell was fighting when he started as a junior middleweight, and he was knocking out people, not only one-punch knockouts, he was hitting guys with the first punch he threw, and he would knock the guy out. It was incredible. But Bell had a past history, and his history did not do well for him and would get him into trouble. And along those lines, Bell, who was a member of the hardcore team, we talked about them a while back, Bell would not be focused on the game of boxing, sport of boxing. His attitude got to go sour. Now, the biggest match of his career, which was a 10-round bout against Paul Vaden back in 1995, the winner of which was going to get a title shot at IBF junior middleweight champion at that time, Baltimore's own Vincent Petway. But Bell came in unprepared, but he was so talented that the bout was still a close bout. And if Bell had been in a great shape, the shape he should have been in, he would have won that bout and gone on to face Vincent Petway for the world title. But Vaden would win the bout, get the title shot, and win the title over Vincent Petway. Matter of fact, Vaden just celebrated his 25th anniversary of him winning the title. And I've said so many times, truly one of the classiest boxers I've ever met in my entire life. He and I are pretty good friends nowadays because even though he lives on the other side of the country, lives in San Diego area where he was from, but he was a tremendous, he's a tremendous person, no question about that. Just recently celebrated their 25th anniversary. Now, Bell, 2 years later, on September 12, 1997, he would get another shot at glory. He's fighting as a middleweight then, and he took on former 3-time world champion, D.C. resident Simon Brown. We talked about this bout last week when we mentioned Simon Brown. Brown was on the downside of his great career. Many thought Bell would take care of the veteran pretty easily. And Bell was doing that in the first 3 rounds, but in the 4th or 5th round, something just went wrong. He wasn't throwing as many punches. He really was looking sluggish. And at the end of the 5th round, Bell sat on the stool. He didn't get back up, and the bout was over. Okay, so that was the end of that bout. And Simon Brown win the bout by 5th round knockout. But at that time, we didn't know that it would be the last time that we would see Reuben Bell in a boxing ring. Now, after the Brown bout, Bell was informed that he had stomach cancer. It was in his early stages, though, and was being treated and was in the process of being treated as Bell would make trips to the Washington Hospital Center. And he went to treatment there. But the prognosis was really becoming excellent, and Bell was really scheduled to return into the ring. But fate played a part. And Bell's past, again, with literally numerous run-ins with the law, caught up to him. A person by the name of Tamar Locker. He apparently watched the bout between Bell and Brown. It was on regional television at that time. It used to be Home Team Sports. It was out of Pikesville National Guard Armory. And Locker kept hearing Bell's nickname of Rapman Bell, and thought it might have been the same person who organized the shooting and killing of his girlfriend, shooting of him and his killing of his girlfriend in 1994. But Bell was never formally charged with any involvement in the situation, but Locker truly wanted revenge. And on February 5th, 1998, Locker walked into the Washington Hospital Center, saw Bell as he was waiting for his latest treatment, and he opened fire and shot him, killed him. Locker was found not guilty by reason of insanity in about 7 years ago or so. Locker was released from prison. Oh, actually, he was not in prison. I'm sorry, he was at St. Elizabeth's Mental Hospital in Washington, D.C., the same place where John Hinckley, who shot Ronald Reagan, was. Reuben Bell his promising career and his life had been snuffed out at the age of just 24 years old. So again, one of the really rough periods. He was an outstanding boxer, could have gone all the way and become a champion. And I never forget, there was an article, big article about this for the City Paper, which is a local paper here in Washington, D.C., and the article was written by none other than Jake Tapper, who is now a prominent anchor on CNN. Wrote that article, very good article on the killing of Reuben Bell. So that was the first one. Then there was a promising heavyweight by the name of Jerry the Technician Ballard. Ballard hit hard for a couple of reasons for me personally. He was seemingly on his way to rebuilding his career after a tough knockout loss to a future heavyweight champion by the name of John Ruiz. That was in 1998. That was a tough loss for Ballard, but Ruiz was just on his way to doing great things. Prior to the loss, Ballard had a solid career. He's holding victories over fellow D.C. native Corey T-Rex Sanders and the former cruiserweight contender Vincent Boulware. The Boulware bout was for the NABO heavyweight title, so Jerry Ballard was the NABO heavyweight champion one time. Now, his last two wins were against trial horses Jason Waller, who's out of Virginia, and Garing Lane. Now, Ballard put Lane in the hospital with a devastating knockout on the Triple Jeopardy card at MCI Center on April 24th, 1999. Now, that was interesting because that bout, I think I got to the MCI now, Capital One Arena, late that night. So I think I missed the bout. My memory serves me correct. But they had a big trip. Of course, Triple Jeopardy was the big card that featured Mark Johnson, Keith Holmes, and Sean B. Mitchell. Sean B. Mitchell versus Reggie Green on that card. But during the press conference after Triple Jeopardy card, I was getting ready to interview Ballard and put it on tape for a local radio station. That time I was working for WOL, and I was doing some reporting for them, and it was going to be on the next sports show I was doing with Butch McAdams. But just as we started, Don King decided to start the conference. I never got to do the interview. And unfortunately, that would be the last time that I would see Jerry Ballard alive. That was in April. And on August 24th, 1999, actually the anniversary of that was very recently. Ballard was murdered at the age of 32. Now I had heard rumors that Ballard was working as a quote-unquote enforcer for some criminal here in the D.C. area. I don't know if that was true or not. I believe he got knifed in a situation someone told me. But I never knew how Jerry Ballard was killed or what had happened, what led to it. He was 32 years old. And I never got to do that last interview with him. And I regret that. No question about that. It was terrible. No question. So that's two. Reuben Bell and Jerry Ballard. Then the passing of Beathaven Bumblebee Scotland. Now, this is the one that was most closely associated with the actual sport of boxing. The other two had connections outside the ring. But B. Scotland was a heck of a guy. All of them were. They were really nice people, don't get me wrong. Even Reuben Bell had his hard edge, but he was a pretty good guy too. But B. Scotland was a great guy. And I tell you, my wife loved him. Not only as a person, but she quite frankly loved the way he looked. He was a built guy. He looked great. Outstanding amateur. And he was doing some good things in boxing. I remember he had a tough loss against Alan Boogaloo Watts at the Washington Convention Center. I remember doing that bout for Boxing Spotlight. And it was the only time at that point that Scotland had been knocked out. It was a tough bout, no question about that. A lot of people were kind of afraid for Scotland at that night. I remember Daryl Coley and other boxers rushing to the ring to see how he was. That's how well loved B. Scotland was. Not to mention Alan Watts was well loved too, but they were both from the D.C. area. But Scotland, everybody loved B. Scotland. Really nice guy. Now, on June 26, 2001, Scotland stepped into the ring aboard the USS Intrepid Museum in New York to face a guy by the name of George Khalid Jones. Now, Scotland took the bout on just 5 days' notice. And I know that because a day before he accepted the bout with Jones, I saw B. Scotland at Michael's 8th Avenue in Glen Burnie, Maryland. And Scotland that night was scheduled to take on another local boxer, talented boxer by the name of Dangerous Dana Rucker. But Dana Rucker hurt his ankle, and he had to back out of the fight. So B came to the show. We briefly talked. I remember, I was looking forward to the bout. I thought the bout was going to be a great bout. And I was telling him how disappointed I was. But I didn't know, and apparently he didn't know, about his bout with Khalid Jones. So that next day, that bout was accepted, and then on June 26, 2001, the bout took place. It was nationally televised on ESPN. When Scotland walked into the ring that day on the 26th, he looked ready to go. But from the first bell, something seemed very wrong. Jones in control the early going. B showed that heart he's been famous for throughout his career and stayed in the bout, but he just couldn't get that full advantage. Despite that, though, Scotland was ahead on one of the cards, and all he had to do was survive the 10th round, the final round, and he would at least have gotten a draw. Now, we didn't know that until after the bout, but he was ahead on one of the cards. But Scotland suffered a TKO in the last round. He slipped into a coma, and then 5 days later, B. Scott was gone at the age of 26. Oh, I tell you, his passing kind of united the whole Beltway boxing community. I remember going to his funeral. And just about everybody that I knew in Beltway boxing was there. I mean, I remember Dan Rayfield was there, the former ESPN broadcaster and reporter. He was working for USA Today at the time, but he was there. I remember seeing Jimmy Lang. I remember seeing all the former world champions we had, the current world champions we had at that time. I remember seeing all that. Everybody that I knew in Beltway boxing was there at B's funeral. And you know who else was there? George Khalid Jones. He was there along with his trainer at that time, the legendary Lou Duva. And for a brief moment, I was a little surprised. Not only surprised that he was there, and I'm so glad he was there, but really briefly, and it was very briefly until I realized and I figured out what was going on. How many people, we all came up to him, up to Jones, and supported him and tried to get him to not feel guilty about the situation. I think he really felt guilty about what happened to B. Scotland. And I remember him just sitting in the air and everybody around him just really kind of supporting him. I'm still kind of get caught up about this even to this day. It was just it was really kind of a touchingly beautiful moment because, you know, we all wanted him to win a world title for B. there was a lot of support for him that day. And we knew it was a tough moment for him. And Jones' career did suffer a little bit because of it. He really didn't fight as much. He never got the world championship, unfortunately. But it really showed a lot of support, and that made me proud because we could have been upset with him, yeah, and probably would have been maybe justified. Maybe some family members would have been justified to be upset. But everybody in the boxing community knew that these things could happen. And these things could happen. And we just knew that it wasn't George Jones's fault. Now, I'll tell you a secret that I have kept for a while. I've never said this before publicly. But Adrian Davis once told me that his bout against Watts, the first bout against Alan Watts, and this bout against George College Jones, were the only two times that B. Scotland ever took blood thinners. And those were two of the most devastating losses. Obviously, the last one was it, but both those bouts, he was hurt pretty badly. And of course, the last one more than that. But he was kind of hurt the first bout against Alan Watts, and then of course this bout against George Jones. It was the only two times that he had taken blood thinners, and Adrian doesn't know why. Adrian Davis doesn't know why he did it, but it was just a sad irony in this situation. Now, back in 2005, George College Jones fought for the first time in Maryland. He took on Darnell the Dingling Man Wilson. And in Jones's corner, symbolically that is, but she was rooting for him hard, was Denise Scotland, B. Scotland's widow. And they would meet for the very first time. They became friends. And I remember Mike Greenhill took a beautiful picture of B. Scotland raising the hand of George College Jones. Now, the bout ended in a draw. But it was a remarkable moment. And it was a really, really touching moment that Denise Scotland had no ill will toward George Jones. And they became friends. Actually, they really did. One other postscript. I used to work at Fort Lincoln Cemetery in Bladensburg, Maryland. I used to be a cemeterian there. So, having to search out sites and whatnot and look for help customers with finding sites, I would have to, walk on the grounds of Fort Lincoln Cemetery. That's where B. Scotland is laid to rest, and I found his gravesite one day. It was amazing. I was very overwhelmed at that point that I found his gravesite. I knew he was buried. It was really, really, really something heavy. It was heavy, no question about that. So I just wanted to talk about the sad side of Beltway boxing. Again, we've lost a lot of folk over the years. I mean, trainers, and one other quick story before we go on. Quick moment before we go on. Congratulations and best wishes to Chris Ray. Now, Chris Ray is a Hall of Fame, DC Boxing Hall of Fame cut man, one of the greatest we've ever had in the area, and he's best known for working with Mark Two Shop Johnson. And most recently, the Boxing Hall of Fame, DC Boxing Hall of Fame, which I'm privileged to be a member of. We pay dues every year. I haven't paid mine. I got to pay mine soon. But one of the dues that's going to be paid in full, lifetime membership, is for the late Bernard Boogaloo Roach, the master trainer who trained Among others, Andrew Council. He was in the corner of DeMarcus Chop Chop Corley when he won the world title, WO world title. He was training Lamont Roach Jr., his second cousin. Demetrius Ballard, he trained at one time, but he passed away suddenly a couple years ago at the age of just 52 years old. And Chris Ray has decided to pay his entire lifetime dues. And it's a gesture. It's a very good gesture on the part of Chris Ray. And I mentioned that primarily to give that some publicity, but also because Bernard Roach was one of the many deaths we've had here in the Beltway that was really just stunning. No one saw it coming. He was a great guy, wonderful person, and it was a really tough time. And we've had tough times over the years, but getting back to Reuben Bell, Jerry Ballard, and Beat David Scotland, those are three promising boxers that had, shots of glory. And for many different reasons, they weren't able to achieve that. So that's my tribute to three really just a sad side of Beltway Pro Boxing. So again, rest in peace, Reuben Bell, Jerry Ballard, technician, and Beat Haven, Bumblebee Scotland. Speaking of which, our tribute follows along the same lines, and I'm going to put my wrestling cap at this point. Talk about a man who was in the southern part of the country, a legend. Now, me being from the Northeast, it wasn't until around 1979, 1980 or so, that I realized that wrestling in other parts of the country, because it was all territorial at that time, was vastly different than when I was watching in the Worldwide Wrestling Federation, the World Wrestling Federation. They did it differently. They did a lot rougher, tougher. You had to be a man's man, so to speak. And they had different types of characters than the wrestling we had here in the Northeast. Because Bob Backlund was champion, before that Bruno Sammartino, Superstar Billy Graham. But the wrestling in our area, in the Northeastern area, I don't know how to describe it. I think it was just more, for lack of a better term, sanitized. That may be the wrong word to use, but it was totally different. A little more cleaner, I guess that could be better put. But in the southern part of the country, in Georgia, in Alabama, in Florida, in the Mid-South Territory, Louisiana and Arkansas, in that area, it was almost like they played for keeps down there in comparison. I mean, it was rough, man. I mean, they took no quarter. They did things that the Northeast would never consider doing. Things like tar and feathering, and bulldogging, and it's just a totally different animal. No question about that. And I didn't realize that until around 1980, 81 or so, because my cousin at that time, my cousin Cornelia, she'd have cable early. I didn't have cable early, but she had cable early. And she being from the Virginia territory, she was from the Mid-Atlantic territory, she would get on her cable World Championship Wrestling with Gordon Soley. And that would honor not only those from the Mid-Atlantic, but before that was Georgia Championship Wrestling. Of course, the Georgia territory, we probably featured there. And one of the people that was prominently featured in that territory was a man by the name of Bullet Bob Armstrong. Bob Armstrong was a legend in the Southern Territory, especially in Georgia and Alabama. He'd make trips up to the Mid-Atlantic area from time to time, but in Georgia and Alabama, he was a legend. And remember the first time I heard of him, really, he was not wrestling all that much at that time because he had suffered injuries to his face. And the storyline was that his face was broken by a wrestler by the name of Ted DiBiase. This was his pre-$1 Million Man days. This is when he first turned heel in Georgia, and he was a tough heel. Oh, he was really tough. But anyway, he was the main heel in Georgia, in the Georgia territory at that time. And Brad Armstrong, Bob's son, one of his sons, would be able to avenge his father. And that's where I first really heard of Bob Armstrong. Really, even before he was wrestling at that time. He was out at that time because he had facial problems. But I started watching him. He and his son Brad would team up, and they were a great team. No question about that. Bob Armstrong was a former Marine, and he served well in the Marine Corps. And he was just a tough guy. And he would also have a masked character he would call the Bullet. And in the Mid-South territory and also in the Alabama Continental Championship Wrestling territory, he would perform as the Bullet. And he had a long career, 5 decades in wrestling. In fact, his last bout was in 2019, believe it or not. And he won numerous regional titles around the country. He would later go on to be the commissioner of Smoky Mountain Wrestling. Jim Cornette would use him as the commissioner and also the number one rival for Jim Cornette's teams. Mostly, I think at that time he was using the Heavily Bodies, which was Dr. Tom Pritchard, and Stan Lane. Stan Lane also a member of the Midnight Express. I remember in the mid-'80s, they had the Jim Crockett Senior Memorial Cup Tag Team Tournament in Baltimore. And Brad and Bob Armstrong were really kind of a wild card in that tournament. They make it all the way to the semifinals. And he was in Smoky Mountain. Jim Cornette used him as not only an adversary, but also the commissioner of the Smoky Mountain territory. Smoky Mountain Wrestling was a territory in one of the last territories, really, but it was in North Carolina, the hills of North Carolina, Asheville area, Smoky Mountains, in all honesty, in North Carolina. And a very successful territory. It gave us Chris Jericho, of course, the Rock and Roll Express were down there, Lance Storm. Really good. It really actually was a pretty good territory, in all honesty. A lot of fun. You can see some of their matches on the WWE Network. But Bob Armstrong's legacy is also defined by his 4 sons, who all were in the business. Talk about Brad Armstrong. Brad Armstrong was an outstanding wrestler, also in the South, primarily in the Georgia territory and Mid-South. He and Tim Horner were team as the Lightning Express. They won the UWF Tag Team titles. Bob and Brad, of course, would team up many times. Brad actually preceded his father in death. He died in 2012. That was just a little bit after the Armstrong family inducted their father into the WWE Hall of Fame in 2011. Scott Armstrong would actually, he'd be a wrestler, but he was also better known as a referee in WWE today, as well as a producer for WWE programming at this time. Steve Armstrong would frequently team up with another man by the name of Tracy Smothers, and they would go by either the Southern Boys or the Young Pistols. And I think he worked heel briefly, but primarily was a face tag team, good guy tag team. And then probably the most successful of the brothers was the youngest brother, Brian Armstrong, who you may know in the WWE as the Road Dogg Jesse James, one half of the New Age Outlaws and a member of DJ Generation X. He's also a Desert Storm veteran, I believe, and he was arguably the most successful of the Armstrong brothers. All of them were very successful in the business, and that was a major part of Bob Armstrong's legacy. And he was able to team with them on a regular basis, all the brothers. And we just found out this past, actually a couple of days ago, really, that Bob Armstrong passed away at the age of 80 years old. Outstanding legend in the Southern Wrestling Territories. Really good wrestler to watch. If you ever see his bouts on Georgia or sometimes in Mid-Atlantic, he was an outstanding boxer. Good promo. And it was really good. Really fun to watch. One of my favorites. I enjoyed him. So, rest in peace. Bullet Bob Armstrong passed away at the age of 80 years old. That'll do it for another edition of Beltway Boxing, the Boxing on Beltway Podcast Network. Of course, brought to you by Real Time Pain Relief. Go to freepainoffer.com, buy $10 worth of Real Time Pain Relief. You get a free $10 tube of Real Time Pain Relief, the official pain relief of George Foreman's Knockout Formula. So you might want to try that. You go to Real Time Pain Relief, rub it on, the pain is gone in real time. And by DeborahSpears.com, great weight loss tips, great jewelry, great training methods at Deborah, Debra Spears.com. I'm Gary Digital Williams. Thank you so much for joining me as always. And always remember to keep supporting the best boxing in the world, the boxing along the Beltway. Thanks for listening. Take care.